Hey everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we learned what the DOM is, a live tree-like structure representing everything on a web page. Today, we're diving into how to select elements in the DOM using methods like getElementById, querySelector, and more. Plus, we'll cover what HTML collections and NodeList are, how they differ from arrays, why we have these different types, and how all this relates to JavaScript objects and object-oriented programming. Let's get started. Here are some of the most important methods you'll use when selecting elements from the DOM. We have getElementsById, getElementsByClassName, getElementsByTagName, querySelector, and querySelectorAll. All of these are methods from the document object, and you can think of methods as just actions that you can perform to do something, to get something that you want in the browser. You'll notice that each of these methods will give you back a certain result, and it's going to be something you might not be familiar with from the early basic JavaScript you might be learning, like arrays. And so I want to go into that. So we've got really the two I want you to keep in mind are HTMLCollection and NodeList. As we move forward, we're going to talk about what those are, why they're important, and how they differ from arrays. So we've got these methods. Now to go into a little example, essentially what we have here to get a better idea of how all this works is we've got some boilerplate. We've got two paragraphs in the browser in the HTML, and we have attached a class to them, just a class attribute. We are also using some JavaScript, and so what we've done here is just use the script tags as well. Now, in the browser here, we can see this is a paragraph, and here's another paragraph, and what we can see is we've got back some values here. We've got an HTML collection and NodeList, and that's coming from the JavaScript. So what's happening here is we have two variables, const HTML collection and const NodeList. Those are just names I chose to use for this example. It can be named whatever you want. It's just a variable, and it's assigned to document.getElementsByClassName. And we put in the class name, which is description, and then the same goes for NodeList. We're doing document.querySelectorAll. We put in the class of .description. This example is using CSS selectors. That's why there's the dot there. And essentially, it's doing the same thing. We're trying to capture the paragraphs with the class of description. And then we're just showing that in the console here. Now, when we see that here, it looks a lot similar to an array, but it's different. They actually look pretty identical. Now, the thing I want you to remember with HTML collection and NodeList is think of them as like containers that allow you to work with the elements or data that you are seeing on a page. So it's just a tool in the toolbox. It is a container that can help you work with the data. So that's all it is. It's still the same elements that you're capturing. You're capturing the two paragraphs, but it's allowing you to work with the data in slightly different ways, and there's pros and cons to both of these. So just something to keep in mind. Now, what are some of the differences? And I want to go into that. Well, with HTML collection, this is going to contain only elements. So generally, and we'll go into this a bit later, but generally, if it starts with getElementsBy, it generally is going to be in HTML collection. And so that's going to be really only elements in that, in the brackets here. Now with NodeList, this can include also text and comments. It's not just reserved for elements. Generally, that's going to be those with the query selector. Those types of ones are going to be more like NodeList more often than not. And it's going to not only include elements. In this case, it looks exactly the same, at least to our eyes in the console, but NodeList can include text and comments as well. In object-oriented programming, in really the document object model, you have that tree structure, and the tree contains nodes, like nodes on a tree, right? And the nodes, there's those three types. The nodes in the tree could be the text you're seeing on the page, the elements, and then the comments as well. That could be, in the page as well. So that's really NodeList and HTML collection. Now, HTML collection as well is beneficial because it's auto updating. It's live generally, and with NodeList, that's going to be more static. NodeList also is going to be supporting the array built-in method of for each, so you can loop through. You want to hop through this, but you can also just convert these two arrays, which I'll get into as a way to start using other types of methods like map as well. Now, with that in mind, let's go ahead and just uncomment this. And so since you can't really, arrays, HTML collections and NodeList have some limitations. You can use arrays or convert them to arrays to have more, bang for your buck, more methods to use and more abilities to work with this data. And so what we're doing here is just using array.from. We're using the from method to take this HTML collection and turn it into an array. And then we're storing it in a variable. And on top of that, we're using the map method now that it's an array. And what we're doing here is we're taking the element, since HTML collections only contain elements, and we're grabbing within the element just the text. And that's that dot text content property we're seeing here. And then we're showing that in the console. And what we're seeing what we get back is actually an array of the strings, the two strings. This is a paragraph, here's another paragraph. And you'll see that now you'll see the difference between what you get back, HTML collection, NodeList versus like an array. And now you can work with this data, how you normally use arrays in JavaScript. Perfect. Now, like I mentioned, if a method says getElementsBy, you're usually getting an HTML collection because, you might be wondering, how do I tell the difference between HTML collection and NodeList? Well, generally it's going to be getElementsBy for HTML collection. And if you are using CSS selectors, like we're doing here, dot description, and you're using like something like querySelector or something like dot child nodes, you're going to get a node list. So if it says nodes in it, or if you're using something like querySelector and you're dealing with CSS selectors, it's going to be a node list. This is generally true, but there's exceptions. Sometimes you might have something like getElementsByName, and that's going to be a node list, not an HTML collection. So just a general rule of thumb as you're working with this. Now, what you can do as well to double check, if you're absolutely unsure, you have no idea, you can just use the instance of to be able to determine, is this what it is? Is this an HTML collection or is this a node list? And so that's what we're doing here. Console.log, taking the variable, is it an instance of HTML collection? Is it an instance of node list? And we see that we get back true for both of those cases. Great. Now, like I mentioned, so the DOM is a tree of nodes, and each node is an object representing parts of the page. And, with this in mind, element nodes represent actual HTML elements. So that's like the paragraph, the div, the button. These are all instances of the element object. And so we talked about how the DOM is just a representation. The HTML in the last video, we talked about HTML as the blueprint, and the DOM is the recreation of that, the live update, dynamic page and everything. That's the DOM, it's the recreation of it. And so these nodes have these special, these special powers, you can say. The other nodes, like I mentioned, not just element nodes, are, text nodes and comment nodes. And we actually have an example to go through to show you. So we have another boilerplate HTML page with, in this case, instead, we have a div of an ID of container. It's our container here. And within the div, we have some text. We have an element with text of world, and then we have a comment. And what we are doing here then we link to the JavaScript. And what we're doing here with the JavaScript is we're saying, hey, grab the container by its ID. So this is another method that document has, another ability. And we're putting it in the variable called container. And then here we're just showing dot child nodes and then dot children in the console. And we can see in the next example that here we're getting back a node list, and then we're getting back HTML collection. So dot children is going to give you an HTML collection. It only contains elements, and that's why we're just seeing the P element. But with child nodes, that's going to give back a node list. And here is where you see that we have text, a paragraph, more text, a comment, and text, like so. And so, like I mentioned, node list can contain elements, comments, and text. So that's what we're seeing here, just to give you a better idea. Both of these are properties, dot child nodes and children. They're properties that belong to the element object, and it allows you to explore the children within the object or the child nodes. So, it's really like nodes within nodes you can think of. Now, besides these properties, there are additional ones, and we call those the DOM traversal properties, like so. They are ways you can, get around and navigate the DOM tree, all of the elements, the text, the comments, all of the items that are on the page, you can navigate through. And there's different ways to access this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I wanted to show you some of the options available. And feel free to pause your screen if you'd like just to take a look. But we have these different ways to access different parts of the tree that make it a little easier for you to access things like getting the sibling, getting the parent, getting the first child, which gets back the first child node. So these are just examples of other properties you can use to get around the tree, not just the ones here, container.childNodes, container.children. Now, you might be wondering, methods and properties, where do they come from? Well, methods, like I mentioned, are those actions. They are functions, essentially, that you can call to perform actions. And those are what we saw with document.getElementById, element.querySelector is another one. And those are going to be your actions. Now, properties, which are the ones we just are talking about now, properties are values or objects you can access directly. So those are, document.body, element.childNodes. They're going to follow after that period. To use a method or to use a property, you need to first, do, element dot the method, element dot the property to be able to use it. These methods and properties are part of the document object. Some of them are. There's also, element has its own methods and properties as well. And then, the window object of the browser has properties and methods as well. Now, the last thing you might be wondering is, this is all great. We know a little bit more about NodeList and HTMLCollection, but why are we using this instead of just using arrays? Why in the first place? Well, what's happening is, HTML collections for starters are live. So the benefit of HTML collection is it's a live functionality. So they update automatically if the DOM changes. If there's updates happening, you're running some JavaScript and you make some updates in the live page, it's updates, then HTML collection is going to also reflect as well. Another thing too to keep in mind is performance. So these options are more lightweight, collections that are faster and use less memory than a full array. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And then the last thing is, just the fact that the DOM API, when it was created, it was designed before modern array methods that we know today, like map and everything, existed in JavaScript. And so that's why we're using NodeList and HTML collection. And it's we've since gotten more abilities with arrays and more power with arrays. And so if you ever want to use that power from arrays, you can just convert HTML collections or NodeList using that array.from that we talked about earlier. And that's going to be right here, array.from, which we talked about. So now that we know this, we have a better idea of selecting elements. We have a better idea of the DOM and object-oriented programming. And, the DOM is really a great example of object-oriented programming in JavaScript. It's, to really recap, the DOM is a tree of objects like the document, element, the text, and more. Each object represents a part of the web page and has properties, data or references to other objects, and methods, which are the actions you can perform. Objects are linked as parents, children, and siblings, all forming a hierarchical tree structure. And it's really like a big family tree of objects you can think of, with each element object having its own methods and properties, which lets you explore and change the page. And so to now just really summarize what we learned, the DOM is that live object tree representing your web page. All of that here made up the elements, text, and comments, which are all nodes. And when selecting multiple nodes, you're either going to get back an HTML collection or NodeList that are array-like, but they're not actually real arrays. These are not arrays despite looking like them. HTML collections contain only element nodes and are live. NodeLists can contain different types of nodes and are usually static. And you can use generally, not all the case, but you can have this hint of, if it starts with getElementsBy, it's an HTML collection. If it starts with .child nodes, it's a NodeList. or you're using CS selectors, it's a NodeList. And the DOM structure and its objects are a great example of object-oriented programming in JavaScript. And that's how you select and work with elements in the DOM, understanding the difference between HTML collections, NodeList, arrays, and how the DOM itself is built with objects you can manipulate using JavaScript. In the next video, we'll start modifying these elements, changing text, styles, and attributes dynamically. If this video helped, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.